The exception to the rule regarding fire protection for feeders in electrical and fire pump rooms may or may not imply that no fire protection is needed. This depends on the specific wording of the exception and the overall context of the rule. Let's explore some scenarios to clarify this point. For example, the exception might state that fire protection is not required for feeders within the electrical room or fire pump room if the rooms are separated by a fire-rated barrier. In this particular case, the exception does not imply that no fire protection is required if the two rooms are adjacent. Even though they are next to each other, the fire-rated barrier still provides a necessary level of protection. The fire-rated barrier is a crucial element in this scenario. It's designed to prevent the spread of fire from one room to another, effectively isolating the potential hazard. The specific fire resistance rating of the barrier, typically expressed in IRs, dictates how long it can withstand exposure to fire before failing. This rating is determined by standardized testing methods and is a key factor in ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants. It's also essential to consider the integrity of the fire-rated barrier. Any penetrations through the barrier, such as for conduits or cables, must be properly sealed with fire-stopping materials to maintain the barrier's fire resistance rating. Failure to do so can compromise the barrier's effectiveness and allow fire and smoke to spread rapidly. Now let's consider a different scenario. If the exception simply states that fire protection is not required for feeders within the electrical room or fire pump room, without any mention of a fire-rated barrier, then it could potentially be interpreted to mean that no fire protection is required, regardless of whether the rooms are adjacent or not. This interpretation hinges on the absence of any specific conditions or limitations in the exception's wording. However, such a broad interpretation should be approached with caution. It's crucial to carefully consider the overall intent of the code and the potential risks involved. Even if the exception appears to waive the fire protection requirement, it's always prudent to evaluate the specific circumstances and determine whether additional measures are necessary to ensure safety. Factors to consider might include the size and occupancy of the building, the potential fire hazards present in the electrical and fire pump rooms, and the proximity of other critical equipment or areas. In cases where the interpretation is unclear or there are concerns about safety, it's always best to err on the side of caution and provide additional fire protection. This could involve installing fire-rated enclosures around the feeders, providing automatic fire suppression systems, or implementing other measures to mitigate the risk of fire spread. It's also important to be aware that local codes and regulations may impose stricter requirements than the national codes. Therefore, it's essential to consult with the local authorities having jurisdiction to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. In any event, it is crucially important to consult with a qualified fire protection engineer to determine the specific fire protection requirements for a project. A fire protection engineer is a licensed professional who specializes in the design and implementation of fire protection systems. They have the knowledge and experience to assess the fire hazards present in a building, determine the appropriate level of fire protection, and design systems that meet the applicable codes and regulations. When consulting with a fire protection engineer, provide them with all the relevant information about the project, including the building plans, the occupancy type, the types of equipment being installed, and any other factors that could affect fire safety. The fire protection engineer will then conduct a thorough analysis of the project and provide recommendations for fire protection measures. These recommendations may include the installation of fire-rated walls and doors, fire suppression systems, fire alarm systems, and other measures to protect the building and its occupants. It's important to follow the fire protection engineer's recommendations carefully to ensure that the building meets all applicable codes and regulations. Failure to do so could result in fines, delays, or even the denial of occupancy permits. In addition to consulting with a fire protection engineer, it's also important to stay up to date on the latest codes and regulations. Fire protection codes are constantly evolving to reflect new technologies and best practices. By staying informed, you can ensure that your projects are always in compliance with the latest requirements. In summary, interpreting exceptions to fire protection rules requires careful consideration of the specific wording, the overall context of the code, and the potential risks involved. When in doubt, consult with a qualified fire protection engineer to ensure that your projects meet all applicable codes and regulations. Here are some additional points to consider. Firstly, the specific edition of the National Electrical Code, or NEC, that is in effect in your jurisdiction can significantly impact the interpretation of fire protection requirements. The NEC is updated every 3 years, and each edition may contain revisions to the fire protection rules. Therefore, it's crucial to ensure that you are using the correct edition of the NEC and that you are familiar with any changes that have been made to the fire protection requirements. Secondly, the type of occupancy of the building can also affect the fire protection requirements. Buildings with higher occupancy loads or that house hazardous materials may require more stringent fire protection measures than buildings with lower occupancy loads or that do not contain hazardous materials. The occupancy classification is typically determined by the local building code and is based on the intended use of the building. Thirdly, the presence of other fire protection systems in the building can also influence the need for fire protection for feeders in electrical and fire pump rooms. For example, if the building is equipped with a comprehensive automatic fire suppression system, such as the sprinkler system, the fire protection requirements for feeders may be reduced. However, it's important to note that the presence of other fire protection systems does not automatically waive the fire protection requirements for feeders. A thorough analysis of the building's fire protection systems is necessary to determine the appropriate level of fire protection for feeders. Fourthly, the location of the electrical and fire pump rooms within the building can also impact the fire protection requirements. If the rooms are located in a fire-resistant enclosure, such as a concrete vault, the fire protection requirements for feeders may be reduced. However, the fire resistance rating of the enclosure must be sufficient to protect the feeders from fire exposure. Fifthly, the size and complexity of the electrical system can also affect the fire protection requirements. Larger and more complex electrical systems may require more stringent fire protection measures than smaller and simpler systems. This is because larger systems typically have a higher potential for electrical faults, which can lead to fires. Sixthly, the type of wiring method used for the feeders can also influence the fire protection requirements. Some wiring methods, such as metal conduit, provide inherent fire protection, while others, such as non-metallic cable, do not. When using non-metallic cable, additional fire protection measures may be necessary to protect the feeders from fire exposure. Seventhly, the presence of sensitive equipment in the electrical and fire pump rooms can also affect the fire protection requirements. If the rooms contain sensitive equipment, such as computer servers or telecommunications equipment, additional fire protection measures may be necessary to protect the equipment from fire damage. These measures may include the installation of special fire suppression systems or the use of fire-resistant enclosures. Eighthly, the potential for human error can also influence the fire protection requirements. Human error is a significant cause of electrical fires. Therefore, it's important to implement measures to reduce the risk of human error, such as providing adequate training for electrical personnel and implementing strict safety procedures. Ninthly, the importance of regular inspections and maintenance of electrical systems cannot be overstated. Regular inspections and maintenance can help to identify and correct potential fire hazards before they lead to fires. Electrical systems should be inspected and maintained by qualified personnel on a regular basis. Tenthly, consider the coordination between different trades during the construction or renovation process. Ensure that the electrical work is properly coordinated with the work of other trades, such as plumbers and HVAC contractors, to avoid conflicts and ensure that the fire protection measures are properly installed. Finally, documentation is key. Maintain accurate records of all fire protection measures that have been implemented, including the fire resistance ratings of walls and doors, the types of fire suppression systems installed, and the results of regular inspections and maintenance. These records can be invaluable in the event of a fire and can help to demonstrate compliance with applicable codes and regulations. In addition to these points, it's also important to be aware of any specific requirements imposed by your insurance company. Insurance companies may have their own fire protection requirements that are stricter than the minimum requirements specified by the codes and regulations. It's essential to consult with your insurance company to ensure that your fire protection measures meet their requirements. Remember, fire protection is a critical aspect of building safety. By carefully considering the factors discussed above and consulting with qualified professionals, you can ensure that your buildings are protected from fire hazards and that the occupants are safe.